graveyard didn't hide its age. It advertised it in every flake of green paint peeling from the iron gate and every angel whose nose had weathered down into a smudge. John filmed the entrance like he was filming a friend's face, close, careful intent on catching whatever it tried to keep quiet. Mary kept brushing soil from a bronze placard that read, Purcell Mausoleum Erected, 1899, because she needed facts when Dread started writing its own. Alice ran a checklist out loud: water lights, masks, spare batteries, antihistamines tape. Kevin balanced on the top step like a diver waiting for a bell. Peter rattled the lock smug that he had learned how to love a city by learning how to open its forbidden doors. A late wind slipped between iron bars and made them hum a single long note, clean bright, like a glass rim sung by a wet finger. From below the stone, a tiny voice hiccuped, once the end of a child's cry clipped as if someone had put a hand over its mouth. We heard that, John said. We all heard that. He made sure the red light was on. It's venting, Alice said, pinching the bridge of her nose. Pressure equalizing. That's normal. Normal and in a tomb shouldn't share a sentence, Peter muttered. Still, he shouldered the door. The hinges gave up with a sulky shrug. The mausoleum's entrance hall was a confidence game, 6 yards of respectable stone before the stairs dropped into an unlit throat. Relief carvings lined the vestibule, cheap Egyptian revival carved with expensive conviction. The crowned figure Horem Purcell in his imaginary regalia strode over stylized waves toward a city skyline of miniature brick tombs. In the background, the sun wore rays like prison bars. American myth in Egyptian clothes, Mary said the way other people said grace. He crossed the sea and decided it meant he owned 2 worlds. Great, Kevin said. Let's go own some content. He grinned at John. Don't forget to grab inserts of the plaques. Algorithm loves history it can skim. A soft, ragged breath went down the stairwell, as if the building itself were nervous about meeting them. Somewhere behind the far wall, plaster ticked and cooled in slow, patient pops, like knuckles being cracked one by someone you couldn't see. They went down together because bravado likes company. The first landing was tiled in bone-white squares that threw back light like a fever. John's headlamp picked out a scatter of tea light stubs and brass cups melted long ago and fused to the floor like fossils of fire. A waist-high plinth displayed a child-sized sarcophagus with a hairline fracture across its gold mouth, as if it had tried to speak, and someone had pressed a finger there and said hush. From the left-hand corridor, fabric whispered over stone so faint, and even it sounded like a bed being made by a very patient nurse. Under the whisper, the lighter chatter of rats stitched in and out, tiny claws writing cursive in the walls. Scene collage, Peter said quietly, pleased, as if the place had read John's shot list, open coffin. Bones spilled like cutlery, cracked statue, the works. John framed each with slow, respectful pans that made the cheap glass in a mosaic river look deep as a real Nile. Why the tea lights? Alice asked. These are recent. She poked a stub. It clung to the tile with that gummy stubbornness wax has when it's decided it lives here now. Ritual tourists, Mary said. People here curse and decide the best possible response is to poke it with new candles and half-remembered Latin. Speaking of Latin, Kevin said I only remember the numbers. What's the CPM on curses? Depends if anyone dies, Peter said, and wished he hadn't. They found the second landing by degrees. The air thinned the way air thins in a hospital waiting room at 3 a.m. You can breathe it, but it doesn't feel like it's breathing you back. The wall inscriptions switched from hieroglyphic theater to English all caps, chiseled like commandments. Whosoever breaks my night shall be bound by my day. I purchased my rest with gold. You will purchase yours with service, manifest destiny rendered as funerary policy, Mary said. He imported objects and metaphors and kept the part where he's in charge. A sound like a small stone being dropped into a long column of water echoed up the stair plink, then waited, then plink again, each swallowed softer, as if the second stone were more polite. A half-remembered lullaby floated up after it, notes correct words wrong, like a mother singing in a language she had learned from a dream. Kevin looked at Alice. Alice shook her head, almost smiled, and said, "Infrasound plus expectation equals haunt." That's the equation. Stay present, keep moving. The second chamber yawned open, a round room with a basalt column in the middle, banded by copper. Each band was stamped with a single word: day. Night, debt, blood, home. Someone had polished home recently. It flashed back their lights like a warning. Mary reached out, stopped herself, and put her hands in her pockets instead, like a kid in a museum. He thought he could stitch an afterlife into a country like sewing a new sleeve to an old coat, she said. You can guess who he expected to do the stitching. Somewhere far overhead, timbers sighed a huge, old house exhale that moved dust like slow rain. Underfoot, tiny grit pattered when they shifted a sandpaper hush that recorded every step. They took the left passage because left is what you take when right looks too obvious. The corridor narrowed until their backpacks scraped the stone with a rubbery squawk. Carved eyes lined the wall's lids, half closed in that Egyptian way that makes every gaze feel private and amused. John panned across them. The lens coughed static snow for a heartbeat, and then came back sharper, as if the camera had adjusted to notice more than it had any right to. Keep rolling, he said. If it blinks, I want it. Don't say it, Alice muttered. Give things names. Okay, John said, cheerful by force. If Mr. Purcell wants to blink, we will respectfully capture Mr. Purcell blinking. Horem Purcell? Mary said. He gave himself a throne name. Horem means owner, Peter guessed. Something adjacent, Mary admitted. Lord of what he could reach. The corridor opened on a trapezoid room with a seesaw of stone mounted over a chiseled groove. Above the groove hung a dark wedge bound with dry, stiff ropes, a stone axe on a pivot. Up on the high wall, a little chute angled toward the groove, where Mary suspected counterweights once ran like obedient moons. Kevin whistled between his teeth. Old school OSHA violation. Do not touch, Alice, said gentle as a warning label. Kevin held up both hands like a choir boy, and then grinned and leaned to study the balance. There's tension still. Wild. Do you guys feel something inside the ropes, creaked as stretching sound fibers waking from a long sleep? A pebble rattled somewhere in the chute and landed with a light, certain click that sounded exactly like the end of a minute. Step away, John said, without looking up from the frame. Kev? Hey. Step. Kevin took one half-step backward heel, nudging the seesaw's shallow end. Not a lot. Not even a nudge. A suggestion. Stone remembered the suggestion too well. Rope snapped with a dry gunshot crack, sharp enough that the air flinched. The axe screamed on its guides, a raw metal-on-stone shriek so bright it felt like someone dragged sound across your teeth. When it hit the groove, the thud came up through the floor into their shins, a heavy consonant that rearranged the grammar of the room. Dust rose in astonished glitter. John's frame showed a slice of Kevin, then no Kevin, and a line of shadow exactly where a body might have stood. No one said his name for a full second. Saying names makes things more true, Alice moved first, because doctors always do. She crouched by the groove and let her eyes adjust the way you do when you're looking at a wound you don't want to be there. She didn't reach down. She didn't add touch to see and hear and smell. She counted breaths instead. Back up, she said, not to the axe or the universe, but to her friends. We have to back up. We can't undo this. The corridor behind them breathed once a low tunnel exhale that dried the sweat on their faces like a cool hand. In that breath, the lullaby returned, and the child's humming soft, self-soothing, and almost singing that had found something to comfort it. John kept the camera pointed at the groove because he couldn't imagine any other direction for his hands. We have what we came for, he said, and hated the words as soon as they left his mouth. We should go. They turned. The corridor had the same dimensions it had before, the same slant, the same slope, but it did not have the same eyes. Where lids had been carved and that gentle half-closed, they were open now. Not wide, not comically startled, simply awake, pupils dark as wells. Mary's light wobbled and caught a new inscription scratched into an old stone, a different hand than the neat caps upstairs. You make your country where you bury your friends. That was not here, she said. That was not. A hiss ran along the floor like someone pulling a vast sheet-tight linen over a long bed. The hiss resolved into a steady silk-on-stone rustle that kept pace with them, not chasing, accompanying. Where's the right passage? Peter asked. He was a man who knew maps like he knew faces. The crypt was wearing a new one without his permission. We took the left, Alice said, controlled, as if speaking evenly could teach the world to behave. We will take the right at the next junction. We will follow airflow. We will. A mild, deliberate tap sounded a head knock, and then after a patient beat, knock. Then after a longer patience, knock 3, and all polite as a waiter telling you the dining room had opened. We will keep going. Alice finished, because doctors also know what you say in rooms that don't need your opinions. They reached the junction. The right-hand passage had been bricked up and then painted to look like not brick the way a liar paints fruit and calls it fresh. John filmed the brick because he had promised himself he would film what was true, even when it tried to look like something else. Behind the paint mortar ticked, as if cooling little bright clicks that made your ear imagine heat. Above them, the ceiling dusted down. In a soft sift, the flour measured into a bowl. Back to the column room, Mary said. The bands. Day-night, debt-blood home. He put his metaphysics in plain sight. If this is a system, the center is the switch. They retraced. The crypt didn't fight them. It didn't have to. It had time. They suddenly did not know if they did. At the column, Mary stood so close the copper's cold got through her sleeves. Home, she said, like a bad password. Nothing happened. Maybe he wrote the question on the wrong line, Peter said, because unhelpful humor is what he owned. Try debt. Mary touched debt with 2 fingers. He bound labor to make his afterlife taste like victory, she said. He imported bodies to build his heaven. If the curse is a mirror, then the payment is time. Time we don't have, John said. He kept filming because the red light was a promise he knew how to keep. The promise couldn't keep them. Promises aren't responsible for what they can't hold. From somewhere directly below the column, a slow, wet knock rose up the shaft through like a palm hitting stone through a layer of water. The knock repeated softer, each time absorbing itself, as if learning manners. Alice crouched and held her palm over the seam where column met floor. Air, she said. There was a void beneath, a burial chamber. That noise is pressure moving through. A small laugh answered high, and breathy a baby's first delighted sound, flipped inside out so the delight looked like teeth. They didn't say Kevin's name. They didn't say they were for. They didn't say what the camera had already said. They chose a direction and walked into it, because choosing is what keeps people from becoming furniture. The corridor they took now was narrower than the one before. The carved eyes here were closed again, but the lids had new hairline cracks, as if something underneath had swollen a fraction. The floor angled down, the air smelled faintly of fennel, and something sweet turned vinegar like flowers and thyme. John's beam found a thread of linen snagged on a rough stone edge. It lifted a little in the breeze of their passing, then lay down again, tired. A rubbing rose in the quiet, soft cloth against itself, a patient twist as if bandages were trying to remember which way to wrap. Under it, a low, breathy murmur moved with them, not words, not quite wind, like a throat, practicing how to have a voice. Keep track of turns, Peter said. Left, right, left. If we loop, we won't loop, Alice said, but wrote LRL on her palm with a pen anyway, because belief is nice and notes are kinder. They passed a niche where offerings had once sat little bowls turned into stone. By time, an iron key fused to a plate, a bracelet greened into another kind of metal entirely. On the back wall, someone had scratched a map, a square for the entry, a circle for the column room, a rectangle for this current throat. At the end, an X and the word door. Below it, another hand had written in a different century's urgency, not that door. Okay, Peter said small. So there are doors, and then there are doors. We want the one that wants us less, Alice said. Remember that. Far behind them, 3 careful taps repeated, knock, knock, knock. Closer together now, like whoever was knocking had become impatient. Closer too, the rat chorus braided into a single cable of squeals that rose and dipped, as if someone were drawing a boo across the dark. They reached a final landing made from a stone that drank light instead of reflecting it. The wall ahead was a slab of the same stuff polished to a dull, oily sheen. Inscriptions ran across it in a hand that tried to be Egyptian and failed in an American way, confidently. I came here to live forever. If you leave you, tell the world I did. Monument is press release, Mary said. Her mouth was dry enough that the syllables sounded like they were made of paper. John raised the camera and found his own reflection swimming dimly in the slab, 5 little figures, one missing already the lens, a single red star where his eyes should be. He steadied his breathing so the star would stop trembling. The slab answered the red dot with a faint electric buzz like an old TV remembering how to be on. Then quietly enough that they might have imagined it, if they'd wanted to, the stone gave a long, tired sigh, the sound of a bed accepting weight. A seam opened at the slab's edge, not wide, not welcoming, enough. A draft came through that smelled like resin and honey, and beyond that like the bottom of a lake. The gap inked itself darker and made a single black line to walk into, if you trusted lines. Door, Peter said, and did not add adjectives to make it feel like less of one. Not that door, Mary said, remembering the map's addendum the way you remember a rule you don't respect until it's about to cost you. But this is the one we get. They looked at one another the way people look at one another when they are about to do something they will either laugh about for years or never speak of again. Alice clipped the camera strap tighter around John's neck. John checked his battery. Peter rubbed the notch in his wrist bone where his watch used to live. Mary put her hand on the slab for one heartbeat and then took it away, as if she had touched a hot stove and considered learning the lesson some other way. They squeezed through shoulders, brushing stone that felt neither warm nor cold, only intent. On the other side, the world narrowed to a corridor that could have been a throat. The floor sloped fractionally downward. At intervals, alcoves opened, some empty, some not. In the second alcove, a coffin lid sat askew like a tongue. In the fourth, a statue of a woman with a broken cheek leaned so the crack formed a smile if you stood in precisely the wrong place. Somewhere ahead, cloth dragged so slow and regular, it marked time better than a metronome. Somewhere behind the taps, ticked again, knock, 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 answered by a tiny, delighted giggle that did not belong to any child they had ever met. Mary Alice said very softly, "What do we do if there's a body? We are in a mausoleum," Mary said. "There are bodies. We are the ones who don't belong." "Not what I asked." Mary didn't answer because she couldn't solve the kind of problem Alice meant. John didn't ask anything because the camera was asking for him, its little red dot, an unblinking pupil that kept the world honest even when honesty hurt. The corridor ended in a hexagonal room that had been designed by someone who liked the idea of geometry more than its practice. The angles were a little off, in the way that makes a room feel tipsy. In the center, a low stone altar held the child-sized sarcophagus from upstairs, or its twin. The golden face wore the same hairline crack across its mouth, as if it had kept a secret longer than anyone should have to. John moved closer, because there are distances you must close to tell the truth. Alice grabbed his sleeve, and then let it go, because you don't hold on to friends in rooms that can trap the shapes of things forever. From within the little coffin, the smallest possible rasp lifted dry papery like old leaves moved by a spider. The rasp arranged itself into a tiny, careful breath, one in, one out, that made the air around it behave as if air were a promise someone intended to keep. John swallowed. "We have to document." He said it to Mary so she could tell him not to. She didn't. "Names are anchors," Mary said, because she had to believe something that sounded like science. If you name a thing correctly, sometimes it lets go of you. Horan Purcell, first pharaoh of the New World. "We see you." The room listened the way a house listens when the last adult goes to bed, the timbers settling with small domestic clicks. From the corridor, the silk on stone whisper grew just a hair louder, as if whoever had been making the bed had finished and was smoothing the sheet with both hands. No one touched the lid. No one was that foolish or that brave. Instead, they did the only brave thing left, and they stood still and waited for the room to decide what it wanted next. It decided to wait with them. They stood in that mutual waiting until time thinned into threads you could see. John filmed dust catching light like snow in a snow globe, too tired to be shaken. Mary read the bands in her head again. Day, night, debt, blood, home. And thought about how a country could be built like a tomb if you laid its stones wrong on purpose. Peter reviewed every path they had taken and discovered he was missing a turn he had not failed to make. Alice counted her breaths, and when counting failed, she counted John's. Their chests sawed the air a little out of sync, like a duet sung by people too tired to harmonize. Then, with shy decisiveness, something under the altar tapped 3 times, tap, 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 each tap the size of a fingertip. The lullaby came back whole, all its notes in the right places, now sung under the breath, by a voice that had learned the song while someone else slept. "That's enough," Alice said, Dr. Final, as if the room were a patient she could discharge by authority alone. "We're leaving the way we came. We're not bargaining with a building." They backed toward the corridor as a unit learned suddenly that you can go forward into reverse and still keep your dignity. John made the camera walk backward with them, stubbornly keeping the sarcophagus framed, because leaving means knowing what you're turning your back on, and doing it anyway. At the corridor mouth, the air changed. You know the way air smells before a season turns that. Fennel resin, the sweet of dried flowers, about to become something else. Far away above the banded column, the mausoleum groaned deep and bass a note older than music. Closer, the soft patter of grit began again, 100 tiny ticks, like a very small, very punctual rain. They stepped into the corridor and learned that it was a different corridor now, the same shape, the same slope, but with walls closer by a finger's width than two. Not enough to call it a trick, enough to call it a choice. You make your country where you bury your friends, Mary said aloud, because reading the sentence had not been enough. We're making one right now. Let's make it outside, Peter said. Behind them, the child's laugh rolled over into a sob, and then into silence so fast it felt like a trick played on gravity. In the silence, bandage linen whispered again this time, nearer like polite fabric clearing its throat before speaking. They didn't run. They moved quickly with care the way you move, carrying hot tea across a room where the floorboards remember other spills. John's light found the map scratch again, square, circle, rectangle, X, door, and the warning underneath, not that door. They chose the not door. They walked past the seam they had widened, past the polished slab that had learned how to sigh and up breath by breath toward the copper-banded column. The crypt let them go because, as Mary would say later, if later existed, the curse wasn't a hunter. The curse was a contract. Contracts take their time. At the column, Alice touched home again. Nothing moved. Nothing needed to. Home, the band said. Where you bury. Where you make your country. Where you count your dead. John lowered the camera for the first time since the door. He looked at his three friends and counted them like breaths. He didn't say Kevin's name. He said, "We're going to leave." Somewhere very near, a whisper repeated the sentence. "We're going to leave," in a voice like paper rubbed between two fingers. Then, as if in answer, 3 knocks sounded under the column, patient, pleased, precise. They started up the stairs. The vestibule's reliefs watched them pass with the impassive half-mirth of gods, carved by men who didn't know what gods were for. The open air at the top of the stairs looked like a trick of light. It wasn't. It was night, which is another kind of door. As they reached the threshold, the wind through the iron bars sang that same single glass note, clean, steady like a warning remembered too late. From under the stone, a baby finished its breath, took another, and the sound rounded out content and whole. They stepped into the graveyard's honest dark. The mausoleum doors settled behind them with the gravity of a promise you cannot take back. Somewhere inside, something small and satisfied sighed a final contented exhale that made the hair on John's arms stand up as if wind had touched him. Day-night debt blood home. Mary said like a roll call to prove who had answered and who had not. No one answered but the wind. They didn't look back until they had to. You have to once. It's how people are built. When they did, the relief carvings did not move. The iron bars didn't hum again. The graveyard kept being what it had promised to be, a place for keeping agreements made with the dead. They left because they could. They would come back because the contract would ask them to. That was how the night felt in their lungs as they walked to the car loaned. That was how the stars looked over the city, bright, remote, expensive. Behind them, very far below, the longest, faintest rustle drew itself across stone like bandages snugging down, readying a room for morning. The crypt's corridor narrowed, pressing closer with each step, until the students could feel the stone leaning in like shoulders crowding them at a concert. Their flashlights jittered over the carved eyes that lined the walls. Before, those eyes had been half-lidded, content to look inward. Now their lids had cracked, wider pupils, black and wet, staring out with the silent curiosity of things that had been forced awake. Peter counted the steps under his breath. He always counted when panic threatened. Alice kept her hands clenched around her first aid kit, as if medical tape could hold back centuries. John filmed compulsively, framing every face in the wall, as though the camera could prove later that the eyes had truly moved. Left or right, Peter asked when the corridor forked. His voice carried oddly soft in his own ears and too loud in everyone else's. Left, Mary said, quickly pointing. Always left. Labyrinth rules. The moment they turned, a hiss began in the dark fabric dragged across stone, not frantic, but steady like a sheet being pulled into place over a very long bed. From behind them, 3 deliberate knocks echoed again, knock, 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 patient as a librarian shushing a room. The left passage opened into a chamber shaped like a keyhole. At the round end stood a basalt column thick and squat, banded in copper that had tarnished into green-black stripes. Each band bore an inscription, 1 word per strip day: night, debt, blood, home. Mary whispered each word as though tasting it. Day, night, debt, blood, home. She touched the last with trembling fingers. This is the theology Purcell built. He wanted to anchor eternity here, a counterfeit heaven in a stolen land. Or a puzzle box, Peter said, eyeing the grooves at the column's base. At their feet, the floor grumbled softly like a throat clearing deep below. The copper rings groaned faintly, a metal whine that stretched like tendons on the verge of tearing. Don't touch anything, Alice warned. But Kevin grinned, unable to resist. You guys realize this is the money shot. Look at it straight out of a horror trailer. He stepped forward, brushing his palm against the lowest copper band. Dust coughed out in a pale cloud. The air vibrated with a taut, fibrous groan like the sound of a rope pulled to breaking point. A pebble skittered through a chute high above and landed with a sharp tick like a clock declaring the end of a minute. Kevin John started, but too late. The column shifted, and from the ceiling descended a massive wedge of stone, an axe head carved with jagged hieroglyphs. The ropes that held it shrieked, the fibers splitting. The crack of snapping cord exploded like a gunshot in the chamber. The wedge screamed on its guide stone, scraping stone in a shrill metallic shriek that stabbed at their teeth. Then came the impact, a bone-jarring thud that rattled the floor like an earthquake in miniature. Dust rained in a shimmering storm, pattering against their jackets in 1,000 tiny taps. The axe had fallen into its groove, splitting the chamber with an executioner's precision. And in its path, there was no Kevin anymore. Alice pressed a fist to her mouth. Mary's eyes filled with tears. John forced himself to keep the camera steady because not filming would mean admitting it had happened. Kevin Peter asked into the dust. The silence answered with brutal honesty. From the corridor outside, the lullaby resumed, wrong notes hummed by a child's voice, just slightly off-key, sweeter now, as if fed. In the ceiling, grit sifted down in a steady rain, whispering against stone like fine sand poured through an hourglass. We need to go, Alice said firmly, swallowing grief the way she would swallow bile. The curse isn't random. It's binding us. One at a time. Mary pointed at the copper bands. This was deliberate, binding one life to hold the others. That's what he believed, that labor built eternity. Kevin, he's been claimed. Peter shook his head violently. No, we can backtrack. Find another path. There has to be another. The carved eyes around the chamber blinked once, just once, in perfect unison. Stone lids scraping softly like chalk dragged across slate. A low whisper rose from the cracks beneath their boots, not words, just breath heavy and slow, as though the floor itself were remembering how to breathe. Alice grabbed Peter's sleeve. "Listen to me. If you panic, you'll run, and if you run, this place will eat you faster. Stay with us." Peter nodded, but his eyes darted wildly around the chamber. They took the opposite passage. The corridor bent sharply, walls pressing closer still. The air smelled of resin and something faintly metallic, like old blood sealed in copper. Halfway down, John's light caught a niche in the wall. Inside rested a long, narrow box wrapped in linen resin stains, darkening its edges. A faint rubbing began from inside fabric, shifting against itself in a restless twist. Then came a scrape, low and steady, as if something wrapped within was trying to remember how to move. Alice's breath hitched. Don't get closer." John did anyway, camera up. The linen shifted almost politely, a strip uncoiling and reaching like a pale ribbon. It brushed his wrist. Monofilament prank, he tried to joke. "Pete, tell me this is your setup." The second loop coiled around his other wrist. The third slid coldly across his throat. The linen tightened silent at first, then squeaking faintly a glassy whine as fibers stretched and locked. John's breath caught rasping like a dog's bark, then fell into a muffled stutter. "Stop!" Alice lunged, catching the bandage with both hands. The fabric burned cold, icy as salt-packed snow. She tried slicing it with her pocket knife. Metal scraped and rang with a brittle ping, useless. From the coffin, a sigh unfurled, long and papery, like dried leaves being shifted by invisible fingers. The lullaby hummed again, this time inches from John's ear, each note pressing into him like a thumb on wet clay. John's eyes pleaded through the camera light. He shoved the lens against Alice's chest, trying to hand her the story, the evidence. His lips moved, but the linen silenced him. The last sound he made was a dry inhale, thin as paper tearing. The bandages loosened. His body slumped, camera strap dragging across Alice's shoulder. The linen fell slack, inert once more, as if it had only borrowed life for a moment. Far off, the baby's sob turned into a satisfied breath, round whole, the sound of something content after being fed. Now there were three. Alice held the camera to her chest, shaking. Mary's voice broke. "The curse isn't about killing, it's about keeping. He's binding us here like servants in his afterlife." Peter turned away, fists clenching. "Then we don't play his game. We don't." A brittle rattle ran across the ceiling like teeth clattering in a glass jar. Then silence, sharp and immediate, the kind that made their ears ring. They moved together, desperate but careful, down into the narrowing dark. The corridor no longer felt like a passage, but a throat. The walls sweated damp resin. Their flashlights made it glisten as if the stone itself had skin. Alice led, shoulders hunched, clutching the camera John had pressed into her chest. The red record light blinked like a wound. Behind her, Mary whispered half prayers and half languages, scraps of Coptic and Latin she had memorized from old books. Peter muttered numbers under his breath, 3s, 5s, 7s, trying to pin order to chaos. They reached a wider chamber, octagonal and uneven, as if its angles had been drawn by a hand that trembled. In the center sat a coffin, long and narrow, draped in rotting linens. Resin stains bled down its sides like tears. From inside, cloth rubbed faintly, the sound of fabric against fabric, restless and deliberate. A low scrape followed like something wrapped too tightly, trying to shift its weight. Alice raised the camera. The LCD screen shivered with static for a second, then sharpened sharper than the human eye. The coffin's lid twitched. Peter swore. "We shouldn't be here." "We shouldn't." Mary pressed a hand to the copper amulet at her throat. "Don't name it. Don't name what's inside." The lid shifted again. Slowly, painfully, as if something beneath were exhaling after centuries. A dry sigh spilled into the chamber, papery and long like dead leaves stirred in a forgotten attic. Then came a faint humming notes of a lullaby, broken and halting, as though someone's lips were stitched shut while they sang. The linens at the coffin's edges began to slither outward. One strip peeled away and slid across the dusty floor like a pale snake. Peter backed up. No, I'm not staying." "Stay with us," Alice snapped. But it was too late. The linen loop coiled around his ankle with the patience of ivy. He tried to kick, but the bandage held fast, cold and heavy. The fabric made a squeaking whine as it tightened, a glassy shriek that set their teeth on edge. Peter's scream cracked into 2 notes, then was muffled as another strip climbed his thigh-wrapping binding. Alice lunged, trying to slash the fabric with her knife. Sparks flared, but the linen only tightened. Mary grabbed Peter's hands, trying to pull him free. "Help me," he shouted. "It's pulling." The coffin groaned as its lid slid fully aside, the hinges shrieking in a hungry metallic cry. From within, the bandages lashed outward in a furious rustle, dozens of strips all whipping like serpents. One wrapped Peter's chest, another his neck. He fell to the floor, thrashing eyes wide with terror. Alice cut again and again, but the blade skittered uselessly. The fabric smelled of resin and rot like a museum basement steeped in mildew. Mary Alice shouted, "Say something, anything." Mary pressed trembling fingers to the inscriptions carved on the walls. "Debt, blood, home." Her voice quavered. Purcell believed eternity was labor. He believed bodies were payment. He's taken Peter as another servant. Peter's eyes bulged. The bandages covered his mouth. The sound of his breathing turned ragged, then choked, then collapsed into a dry, fluttering rasp, like paper burning without flame. The lullaby grew louder now, complete, sung in a child's voice just inches from his ear. Alice screamed, pulling with all her strength. But the bandages yanked Peter backward, dragging him into the coffin's open mouth. His nails scraped furrows in the stone floor, leaving bloody crescents behind. The lid slammed shut with a thunderous clap, bronze nails clicking into place, like teeth counting themselves. From inside, muffled thuds pounded once, twice, 3 times, then stopped. Silence. The coffin stilled. Alice stumbled back, panting, knife shaking in her hand. Mary leaned against the wall, sobbing. "He's gone. He's gone." From within the coffin, a faint rustling answered, small and deliberate, like papers being folded with care. Then the baby's giggle rang out high and delighted, before warping into a shrill, hollow laugh that scraped their ears raw. Alice pressed the camera to her chest, whispering through her teeth, 3 left. Just 3. Mary shook her head. "No, we're not 3. We're already less than that. The curse has all of us. It just hasn't collected the rest yet." They turned to leave, but the corridor behind them had shifted. The walls bowed inward, slick with something wet. Carved eyes opened one by one, following them. A chorus of tiny taps began, hundreds of fingertips patting the stone, polite at first, then building into a shushing tide. Over it, the lullaby hummed again now, in harmony, 2 voices, one higher, one lower, twining like vines around their ears. Alice forced herself forward, dragging Mary by the hand. The cameras steadily, unblinking, bearing witness. The corridor thinned, then yawned into a cavernous hall. Pillars rose like vertebrae, carved with spiraling text in dozens of languages, Coptic Greek hieroglyphs, and even fragments of English phrases, all scrawled in jagged hand. It was as if Purcell had forced every tongue he'd known into stone, sewing a patchwork of borrowed voices across the chamber. Alice lifted the camera. The lens struggled to focus. Each line of text crawled twitching as if alive. Mary whispered, "This is the chamber of tongues." He wrote his dead in every language so no god could ignore it. A low chorus began words in overlapping dialects muttered from the walls. Some syllables hissed like snakes, others clicked like teeth. The air buzzed with layered voices rising, falling, weaving into something like a hymn. The floor beneath them wasn't stone but parchment. Alice bent to touch it, recoiled. The ground was stitched sheets of human skin, thin, translucent, inked with letters. Peter's absence burned behind her eyes. She forced it down. "We keep moving. We don't stop." Mary clutched her amulet. "Don't step on names you recognize. If you read them, they'll answer." They picked their way across, careful not to glance too long at the scrawled words. Still the chamber hummed, feeding on their attention. The voices grew sharper, calling names now: Alice, Mary, John. Each name dragged like a nail over glass, intimate, accusing. Mary stumbled. One name etched under her shoe flared, glowing hot. She cried out, falling to her knees. The wall behind her groaned and split, a vertical mouth tearing open, lined with blackened teeth. It whispered in the voice of her dead brother, syllables wet and trembling. Mary's face blanched. "No, you're not him. You died in the fire." The mouth chuckled, a bubbling sound like water boiling in a throat. Then it spat ash across the floor, shaping her brother's name over and over again. Alice grabbed her shoulder, yanking her back. The mouth snapped shut, teeth clattering like bones thrown into a bowl. They staggered toward the far end. Ahead, the chamber narrowed into a stairway spiraling down. But before they reached it, the parchment floor shifted. Letters peeled upward, lifting as paper-thin shades. Dozens of whispering silhouettes, rose faces blurred with ink. Their voices overlapped, each uttering prayers, curses, bargains, in a deafening tide of human tongues. John swung his flashlight wildly. "Back, stay back," his voice cracked. One shade lunged, shoving itself down his throat. John gagged, retching as guttural syllables poured out of him, Greek Coptic English forced into his lungs. His ribs rattled like wind chimes. His throat ballooned, chords straining as if every word ever written in this place demanded to live inside him. Mary screamed. "They're filling him. He'll drown in language." Alice tried to pull it out, clawing at the ink shadow, but it melted into John's chest, vanishing beneath his skin. His eyes rolled back. His lips kept moving, spewing phrases none of them understood. His voice fractured into hundreds, a babble of men, women, children, all pouring from one mouth. It rose to a shriek, then to a chant that shook the chamber's bones. Alice slapped him, desperate. "Fight it, John, stay with us." For a heartbeat, his own voice broke through run. Then his jaw snapped wide, two wide ligaments tearing. A torrent of letters burst out, burning hot glyphs, swirling like locusts, slicing the air with razor sounds, until his chest collapsed inward. John crumpled skin, smoking his final breath, whistling like a flute choked by ash. Silence fell. The shadows retreated, satisfied. Alice stared, numb, clutching the camera with bloodied hands. Mary wept into her palms. From the wall the voices sighed as one a long exhalation like a theater after curtains drop. Now there were two, only Alice and Mary. They descended the spiral staircase, each step sticky as if sinking into tongues that had fallen silent. The spiral staircase delivered Alice and Mary into a crypt so vast, the ceiling disappeared into shadows. Torches burned without fire, blue flames licking air that smelled of rust and rot. Rows of stone sarcophagi lined the chamber lids ajar, as if waiting for occupants yet to arrive. In the center stood a black granite coffin, larger than the rest. Its surface shimmered with carvings that seemed to crawl like worms when stared at too long. Mary's voice was a whisper. "This is it. Purcell's grave. The pharaoh's debt sealed here." From the dark, a deep hum began, like the groan of earth shifting. It swelled into a chant, syllables layered guttural, almost mechanical. The sarcophagi rattled lids, scraping stone like nails down slate. Alice clutched the camera, her knuckles white. "We end it here, or we don't leave at all." Mary touched the amulet at her chest, tears streaking her dust-covered face. "If we open it, we might free him. If we leave it, it will follow us forever." They approached. The granite lid shivered though no hand touched it. A chorus of screams erupted inside the coffin, hundreds of voices wailing at once, echoing like 1,000 children crying down a metal tunnel. The lid burst open. Inside, a figure sat upright, the pharaoh Purcell. His face was wrapped in linen fused to skin, but his eyes glowed like molten iron. His hands were skeletal but bound with golden rings. He stood towering robes, dragging like shadows, and spoke. His voice was not one but many, male, female, old, young, all woven into a single roar. "You carry our dead." Alice staggered back. "We're not part of this." The air cracked like splitting wood. A boom rolled through the crypt. Dust rained from the ceiling stone, grinding. Purcell lifted a hand. The sarcophagi around them snapped open. Dry husks and mummies rose their bones, grinding jaws, clicking like chattering teeth. The chamber filled with a rustle of linen and the scrape of brittle nails across stone. Mary screamed. She ran, but a skeletal hand burst from the ground, grabbing her ankle. She fell dragged across the floor. Alice lunged for her, but 3 mummies intercepted, their hollow mouths gaping. From their throats came not air, but the shriek of rats, the squeal of rusted hinges, the hiss of steam. They dragged Mary to the black coffin. Purcell raised his other hand, and the golden amulet at her chest flew off, shattering midair. Mary convulsed. Blood gushed from her ears, streaming down her neck in hot rivulets. The sound of bones cracking echoed as if her skull split from inside. Her eyes rolled back. She collapsed, lifeless, dragged into the coffin. The lid slammed shut, sealing her scream in stone. Alice froze, trembling. Only she remained. The camera slipped from her hand. Its red recording light blinked in the dust. Purcell's gaze fixed on her. "You will carry me forward." Stepped closer. She stumbled back, tripping over bones. The mummies hissed, their jaws clacking in unison like a typewriter possessed. Alice screamed, "No, I won't." She grabbed a jagged stone shard from the floor, driving it into her own chest before he could touch her. Her scream echoed, then cut, replaced by the hollow thud of her body hitting stone. The camera clattered beside her, its lens cracked. The recording continued. The frame showed the chamber trembling. A roar filled the crypt deeper than thunder, shaking the very air. The granite coffin split, spilling black smoke that screamed like thousands of mouths tearing open. The last image bones scattering statues, cracking rats swarming like rivers of teeth. The camera fell sideways. Its lens captured only shadows. In the dark, a single sound remained, the faint sob of a child, echoing endlessly as if the tomb itself wept. The recording ended,